Hi, I'm Obsessing Again. In this video, I'll look at 1997's Blade Runner and how it faithfully creates a new story in the Blade Runner world. Blade Runner's inspired story comes from iconic sci-fi writer Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It's a story broken down into digestible chapters that convey the far distant future of an acid-raining Los Angeles that's been left in the shadows of the galaxy as people flee to space. The book emphasises how far removed this version of Earth looks like, set only 5 years before this game would eventually release. Though his terms such as laser tube are very 1960s sci-fi, the subjects of what is real and what isn't are more prevalent today with the rise of AI software. His vision is an extensive exploration on society, such as wealth and social status and whether you own living animals. Secondly, his book explores the thoughts of androids, or Andys as they're referred to, blending into the high-rise city buildings. It looks at whether they too aspire to the same social status as humans. Nearly 30 years after this book was published, we see a new story in the world of Blade Runner, in the form of a 3D point-and-click adventure game. The game has a plot that follows parallel with the film, taking place in the same area at the same time, with sprinklings of the original film seeping into the backdrop of a grimy and contentious LA. Examples of this can be found roaming the streets in the drizzling rain or coming home to go over your evidence. The game toes the line between both the source, in the book, and the visual adaptation from Ridley Scott. Whilst the opening of the book is Deckard dreaming up the idea of having an actual living animal, the game's sobering opening is a group killing animals in a pet store in town.
These are extremely rare animals of the highest quality.
What a coincidence. So am I. That is the price for humanity.
The game takes inspiration from the source material, but sheds a dimly lit light on the importance of living animals and social status, but differently.
Not my animals, please. I'm begging you.
Unlike the grizzled veteran Deckard, Ray McCoy, a young rookie, is called upon to investigate the crime scene. This leads to him uncovering secrets and a slew of replicants roaming the LA streets. Tension is created through the discovery of who are replicants. It's somewhat enthralling, particularly when you're using the Voight Conf in the game.
Get too excited, the other Blade Runners are all jammed up. Holden sucking dinner through a straw. Gaff's working the Tyrell break.
Both Deckard in the novel and film portrayal emphasise that he isn't your heroic protagonist. He's confident, but when met with the challenge of the Nexus 6 androids, epiphany occurs that he's severely disadvantaged. He spends most of his time chasing his tail, being 1 or 2 steps behind the replicants. What I loved about the game's story was the constant rhetorical questioning we have over Ray McCoy. His slightly smug and begrudging demeanour make him slightly more dislikable to Harrison Ford's portrayal, but his quippy remarks and growing internal dread during the story make him an amusing protagonist.
I was just finishing up my 12 out on patrol when I got the call. Welcome relief, considering that the most action I'd seen all night was a schizoid grandmother doing the shimmy in her underwear in the second sector.
Like Deckard, McCoy too begins to question his place on Earth and whether he belongs, chasing shadows in sketchy alleyways and finding the root of all the dark underworld transactions make him unsure whether bounty hunting should be his calling.
Nothing even remotely interesting, but hell, if I was going to root through trash, my expectations weren't too high.
Pour me one.
Just one?
One, but one good one.
Besides the striking visuals and recreation of iconic scenery, conversations with characters provide lots of insight. For every bar, hotel reception or arcade, there are numerous characters you can have the pleasure or displeasure of interacting with. Whether it's learning of cheese being a contraband from Isabella's Jamaican restaurant, or your runnings with your female colleague, the brash and quippy Blade Runner Crystal Steele.
I thought you were on special assignment.
Wasn't too damn special after I had the suckers out.
This game is littered with new characters, along with returning characters such as Sean Young's Rachel. Lastly, the game is self-aware enough to have a sprinkling of callbacks and references to the beloved Deckard. You'll see the odd nod, such as him lurking in the background in one of the images you collect in his long, muddy beige coat, as a fun Easter egg. In addition to that, when doing your firearms practice, Deckard is shown in the leaderboard, though placed slightly low. Randomly generated setups in the story not only offer tremendous replayability, but also a complex way of subverting expectations. Characters like Lucy Devlin, who was introduced at the start, are prominent, but their fate has many variations. whether she's a replicant, a human, friend or foe. Why I find all the Blade Runner adaptations compelling is that there are few definitive answers, regardless of whether Ridley Scott claims Deckard as a replicant or not. With Ray McCoy, the constant questions and inherent guilt of testing people to find out whether they are replicants, and his uncertainty is unnerving. When buying this game, I knew very little of its lack of actual gameplay, and more so that it was a point-and-click adventure. What I undermined was how non-linear the beats of the story were. There's an overall story to follow, but you can engage in different ways. This involves backtracking, and though it's not necessarily straightforward, it requires you to think somewhat abstractly about how you progress within the game. As a modern gamer, you're mostly spoon-fed where and what you're meant to do. Normally, when I get stuck in these scenarios, it's a case of opening YouTube and searching for a tutorial, but because of how dated this game is, a lot of the information I had to find out was done through archived message boards. Because of the gameplay mechanic of pointing and clicking, sometimes it's very easy to gloss over the crucial artifact or hidden passage. The game doesn't have a bold objective type to follow on screen or a guiding arrow, so it requires you to embody the role of the detective Blade Runner. The gameplay mechanics are clunky, and as a modern gamer, it feels like you're fighting against the system. The shooting mechanics seem fun, but the execution of it made me want to be on the receiving end of a bullet. For modern audiences, it would require a lot of persevering, in addition to relentless saving before shootouts, so you aren't set back 10 to 15 minutes before those encounters. The shooting is a last resort, being part of the LAPD, but these moments are unrewarding. Playing the enhanced version doesn't stray too far from the original release, which is a testament to it. Visually, Blade Runner is a bleak film noir. The neon signage flickering and the tumbleweed of trash makes it feel more tangible than the sci-fi films of the 1970s. The film strays from the campiness of men in spandex and space battles, and because of this, its grounded nature has aged like fine wine. The game embraces this aesthetic and it's captured perfectly, whilst technologically, for its time, being very limited. Familiar scores from Vangelis are lovingly recreated, but it's these striking locations you're presented with that are modelled 3D, and feel like stage sets through the lens of a camera. A whirling fan in an office or fumes rising from the food stalls act as cinematic wallpapers. One of the contributing factors for how long-lasting the Blade Runner world is visually is down to its use of Frank Lloyd Wright. The Ennis house, designed by the architect in 1924, is created out of blocks of concrete. It's striking as well as inspiring. 100 years later, the building is evocative like a monolith. However, when used in a sci-fi setting at night, the building feels stark and imposing. The concrete exterior blocks were recreated for interior shots and used in Deckard's home. These were created making casts of the Ennis house. The rectangular and square patterns pressed into the faces appear like wallpaper when seen in Deckard's home. His designs are timeless, and his style of architecture heavily influenced the design of Blade Runner. This can be seen in the Tyrell Corporation when Deckard meets Rachel, with the Ennis house's brown-framed windows allowing a Californian sun to beam through. Perhaps this was subconsciously considered when shooting this scene. Why this game is evocative to new and old players is how it blends both sources perfectly. Whilst the book doesn't capture the gritty elements, the film was able to transport you to another world, but in doing so left behind the best elements of emotion from the book. Deckard and Rachel's love story takes precedence over Deckard's inner turmoil about what it means to be a Blade Runner. Because this game has no apparent love interest, all of Ray's thoughts and feelings are known through his monologues. Whilst Deckard wrestles with what it means to be human, Ray McCoy questions the treatment of replicants and whether he, too, is one.
Would you say that the 6s are smarter than the old 4s and 5s?
They're supposed to be. Stronger and more agile, too.
Maybe they want to pick your brain about their brains.
I think you should leave now, Mr. McCoy.
When analysing Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, it's Deckard gradually developing empathy for androids. In the earlier parts of the book, when Deckard is speaking with Rachel about an owl he learns to be digital, he goes, "It," he thought. She keeps calling the owl "it." Towards the later stages of the story, he details, the electric things have their life too, paltry as those lives are. Whilst he may not see value in replicants and androids as humans, his stance has changed considerably in the space of a day in which the book and film take place. Between these stark comments lay chapters worth of evidence of self-loathing and guilt for being a Blade Runner. What all three media forms understand is the importance of identity. How the world of Blade Runner and its replicants work is in its artificial memories. When confronted with the thought of whether they are legitimate memories, it completely destabilises their existence. Because of how sophisticated the replicants are, it causes self-doubt in everyone. It reinstates the panic that what you've experienced is even real. In a world of artificial animals, what's to say you're not like the android sheep? As humans, we decipher meaning in life through connection and shared interests. If you were to be told that you don't freely think or feel and that it's artificial, would you lose your purpose?
She's a replicant, isn't she?
I'm impressed. How many questions does it usually take to spot one?
As Philip K. Dick wrote, it's the basic condition of life to be required to violate our own identity. The developers of this beloved game were Westwood Studios. Upon learning more about the studio, you can't help but feel dejected. In the 1990s, the video game landscape was vastly different compared to what it is now. AAA gaming in the 21st century means less risky moves, protected IPs, and even longer waits between installments. And yet, Westwood Studios innovated and experimented with new technology, whilst idolising the IPs that were bestowed upon them. The additional shame that comes with learning this was how they created games that were enhanced from their screen counterpart. Blade Runner wasn't an instant success, and Dune's popularity has only got bigger thanks to Denis Villeneuve's reimagining of those books. You can't help but feel like they were a studio that didn't get the opportunity to have mass appeal. With a new Dune game announced and the Blade Runner 2033 game, Westwood Studios walked so that Funcom and Annapurna could run. For a small game developer in the 1990s to develop a new story within an existing franchise puts modern developers to shame. The endless story endings and setups not only offer great replayability, but demonstrate why people are so engrossed with Blade Runner. It's a world that's open to interpretation.
He even thinks you're a replicant. He can waste you right where you stand. Nice job, eh, detective?
Its philosophical meanings and existential questions are a testimony to the sci-fi vision of Philip K. Dick. By merging the two mediums of film and book, Westwood Studios created a gaming counterpart that stood equally tall in a time when games based on movies were pale in comparison. Instead of creating a score to level with Vangelis' iconic soundtrack, they were smart enough to understand that creating something new would devalue what fans adore in Blade Runner. Though this game's gameplay doesn't compare to any modern adventure game, it has influenced the stories of new sci-fi adventure games. 1997 Blade Runner is a throwback to an era of gaming that might be perceived as ancient, and yet its attention to detail and care would erode most AAA developers. This leads me to talk about the damning way my story played out. I found that chasing shadows and being caught up in a web of corrupt bureaucracy made me doubt whether I was a replicant or not, which is the best compliment I could give the game. Blade Runners are bounty hunters, and Ray McCoy corrupted his values by killing and ending the game by being a servant, whilst not knowing who he really was.
How come I don't feel good about it?
Who knows? Buy yourself another animal, maybe. A real one, not a Tyrell fake.
Thank you for letting me obsess again.